When you think of zombies, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Brains, right? And when you think of space, what do you think of? Well, hopefully not flesh-eating space zombies, because if you had, you might be alone in the universe. In our previous episode about zombie viruses, we looked at how a zombie apocalypse would play out on Earth. So now we're returning our sights to the cosmos to see how humanity would fare against a reanimated galactic foe. After all, it only takes one bite from an infected person for someone to become a member of the undead horde. But what if that infection were brought into the mix? Would spacesuits protect us from a zombie virus? Or would we all become intergalactic chum? Let's find out. This is Air, Space, and Everything in Between. Some experts predict that if a zombie apocalypse were to happen on Earth, our best chance of survival would be to blast off into space and start a new colony on Mars. But hold on. Mars has been dead for billions of years, so it's unlikely that there are any living microbes kicking around. And while that may seem like a good thing, it also means that the red planet has no immune system. Any alien invaders would have free reign over the landscape. That is, unless those invaders are zombies. In this case, let's say our intrepid crew blasts off in a generation ship. Generation ships are designed for long interstellar travel. They carry everything needed to sustain human life across multiple generations until the ship reaches its destination. If a zombie outbreak were to occur on Earth, but we could get away before things got too bad. A generation ship seems like the most plausible vessel to save some humans and potentially the human genome. Plus, if we didn't evacuate Earth, we would probably kill ourselves by contaminating the planet with nuclear fallout. So we need a vehicle big enough to accommodate a sizable crew. Self-sustaining life support systems, food and water supplies, and efficient power systems. And thankfully, NASA has already designed a few models of generation ships. One such ship, the DARPA 1294, was designed by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and holds enough food and water to sustain 40 people for 120 days, which is just enough time for them to make it to Mars. Another design, the Stanford Taurus, is more than a bit ambitious. It takes the form of a giant donut-shaped station in orbit around Mars. Once it gets there, the ring would open up like a book to reveal two circular sections, each with enough room for 10,000 people. However, that particular plan is still stuck in the realm of science fiction. So let's go with the DARPA 1294. With 40 people on board, we've got a fighting chance. The first problem? Spacesuits. We can safely assume that the zombie virus would be transmitted via bodily fluids, blood, saliva, urine, feces. Because our astronauts will be sharing a ship, it's likely that the virus could spread very quickly through the crew. So our best bet is a sealed spacesuit. Sealed suits are completely independent and have their own life support systems. Which is important because the last thing we want is a leak that exposes everyone else on board to the virus. Unfortunately, these kinds of suits aren't exactly comfortable. They're bulky, they limit movement and vision, and they don't really allow for much interaction with others. So if we want our crew to stay sane, we'll need to limit the time they spend in their suits. This means trips outside will be quick and dangerous. And since the goal of the mission is to colonize Mars, we'll need to establish a base camp as soon as possible. Colonists will need to venture out into the thin Martian atmosphere to gather resources and build a shelter. For now, though, the sealed spacesuits will keep the undead horde at bay. The next problem is radiation. When it comes to space travel, radiation is the second most dangerous thing out there, right after, well, space itself. The vacuum of space doesn't have enough oxygen for people to breathe, and it would freeze anyone who is unprotected. While in transit between Earth and Mars, our crew will be exposed to cosmic rays and solar winds, which consist of charged particles traveling at high speeds. The most dangerous part of a solar storm is the intense burst of radiation that occurs when a coronal mass ejection hits the upper atmosphere. A strong geomagnetic storm like this could fry electrical components and disrupt communications on Earth. If it happened during our voyage, it could be enough to wipe out our entire crew. Thankfully, Mars's 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, can help mitigate that risk. These moons are much smaller than Earth's moon, and they have weak gravitational pulls, which means that they can easily be captured by a ship traveling at moderate speeds. So our crew could use one of these moons as a shield against the worst of the radiation storms. Now, finally, we come to the question, why are Martians always green? When we think of aliens, we tend to imagine little green men running around. But why? Green seems to be a popular color choice for fictional aliens. Maybe it's because we rarely see creatures that are red, blue, or purple. Or maybe there's something to it. In 2021, scientists used spectroscopy to analyze the surface of Mars. Their findings suggested that the rust we see all over the red planet is actually iron oxide. Iron is one of the most abundant metals on Earth, and it's essential to all life forms. In fact, every creature we know of that has blood uses iron to carry oxygen through their bodies. So it makes sense that life on Mars, if it ever existed, would have used iron, too. But unlike Earth, Mars's iron is oxidized. As the rusty color suggests, this means that the iron has reacted with oxygen, which would prevent it from carrying oxygen through the body. This discovery suggests that life on Mars would have a hard time evolving past a single-celled organism. So if our astronauts were to encounter any native life on Mars, it would be microscopic. But that wouldn't stop it from being a threat. After all, our astronauts will need to gather samples from the surface in order to determine whether or not the planet could support human life. If they brought back even a single cell contaminated with microbes, it could be enough to start a pandemic. So we'll need to implement strict quarantine procedures. Any Martian samples will need to be treated as if they re-radioactive until we reassure they re-safe. Our colonists will also need to wear hazmat suits while collecting samples and building the base. And since the atmosphere on Mars is thinner than Earth's, these suits will need to provide breathable air and pressure, meaning that our crew won't be able to venture out without bringing a bubble along with them. But here's the million-dollar question. Does the zombie virus care about the vacuum of space? And the answer may surprise you. There are 3 types of viruses: DNA, RNA, and prion. Prion viruses are unique because they don't contain either DNA or RNA. Instead, they're made up of protein. Prions cause diseases like mad cow disease and scrapie in sheep. And unlike other viruses, they can't be killed by heat or chemicals. They're also highly resistant to radiation. So it's theoretically possible that a prion could survive the journey to Mars and even a nuclear blast. If that were the case, then there's no way to guarantee the safety of our crew. Even if they managed to seal themselves inside the ship, a prion could survive for decades in a dormant state, only to emerge once the host's immune system is weakened. And a long voyage through space would likely weaken our crew, both physically and mentally. Plus, it would be impossible to get rid of a prion once it starts spreading. There's no vaccine or cure. So our best chance of avoiding a galactic zombie outbreak would be to never set foot on Mars in the first place. Since the beginning of the space age in the 1960s, scientists have dreamed of sending humans to Mars. But the dangers of space travel shouldn't be underestimated. Radiation, the cold vacuum, toxic planets, it's enough to make anyone stay firmly planted on Earth. Fortunately, we've learned a lot in the last half-century. So while it might not be possible to send humans to Mars anytime soon, we'll be a lot better prepared for whatever we find there. And if we do find any intelligent life on Mars, we'll know better than to bring them back to Earth. So while it may not be possible to avoid a zombie outbreak forever, we do have the knowledge to protect ourselves against some of the most common threats out there. As long as we stick together, we should be able to weather any storm. If you enjoyed this episode, we've got plenty more where that came from. So check back for new episodes every week. And if you want to learn more about the amazing science that happens all around us, be sure to check out our educational videos. And remember, space is pretty, but it's also dangerous. So don't look directly at the sun.